Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. It was the late 1960s in California. The world was full of music, change, and dreams of peace. Young people gathered in parks, danced at concerts, and spoke of freedom. The nights were alive with laughter, and the days were filled with hope. But in the middle of this bright time, a dark shadow began to rise. From quiet roads to busy city streets, a man appeared who would call himself the Zodiac. He was not looking for peace. He was not looking for love. He was hunting. He killed without warning. He wrote letters filled with threats and strange codes. He mocked the police, played with newspapers, and frightened millions of people. His symbol, a circle with a cross through it, became a mark of fear. The Zodiac was more than a killer. He was a mystery. He wanted to be seen but not caught. He wanted his name to be remembered, but his face to remain hidden. Decades later, his true identity is still unknown. This is the story of the Zodiac Killer, America's great unsolved crime mystery. The year was 1968. America was changing. Young people were talking about peace, love, and freedom. Music played loud in parks and festivals, and people spoke of hope for a better future. But in California, in the quiet towns around the Bay Area, another story was beginning. It was not about peace. It was about fear. It was about a man who would later call himself the Zodiac. On the night of December 20th, 1968, two teenagers drove out into the dark countryside. Their names were Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. She was only 16, a happy girl who loved school and friends. He was 17, quiet, polite, and known as a good boy. They wanted to spend time together, away from the noise of the world. They parked along a lonely road near Vallejo. The sky was black, the air cold, and only the sound of night surrounded them. They thought they were alone. They were not. Somewhere in the shadows, a man was watching. His face was hidden, his thoughts secret. He held a gun. No one knows if he followed them or if he was already there. But what happened next was sudden and cruel. Shots were fired. Loud, sharp sounds cut the quiet night. David was shot in the head. Betty Lou ran, trying to escape. She did not make it far. Bullets struck her in the back. She fell to the ground. She never stood up again. The next morning, police arrived. The scene was sad and strange. Two young lives had ended for no reason. Families cried, the town whispered, and fear began to grow. At first, people thought it was just a tragic crime. No one could guess it was the first step in a long, dark story that would haunt America for years. Months passed. Life went on. But the man in the shadows was not finished. He wanted more. On July 4th, 1969, as fireworks lit the sky, another young couple drove out to a quiet place. Their names were Darlene Farron and Michael Mageau. Darlene was 22, full of energy and charm. She loved life and had many friends. Michael was 19, shy and soft-spoken. They parked in a lover's lane in Vallejo, thinking it was just another summer night. But once again, the night was not safe. A car pulled up beside them. Its headlights were bright, blinding. At first, Michael thought it was a police officer. He relaxed. But then the man stepped out. He raised a gun. Before they could react, shots exploded. Glass shattered, screams filled the car. Darlene was hit again and again. Michael, though badly wounded, managed to survive. The shooter walked back to his car, calm and silent, and drove away. Michael was rushed to the hospital. He told police what he remembered. The attacker was a white man, around 30, heavyset, with brown hair. It was not much, but it was something. Still, the killer was gone. Then came the letters. Only a few days later, 3 different newspapers received strange envelopes. Inside were handwritten notes. The writer claimed he was the one who killed the teenagers in December and the couple on July 4th. He demanded the letters be printed on the front page, or he would strike again. Each letter contained part of a cipher, a puzzle of symbols and codes. Together they made one large message. The writer gave himself a name. He signed with a crosshair symbol, a circle with a cross through it. He called himself the Zodiac. The letters were chilling. They were not only confessions, they were threats. He said he would kill again, and he wanted the world to read his words. Police were alarmed. The public was shocked. Who was this man who wrote with such coldness, who killed without mercy, and who now played games with newspapers and detectives? The cipher was solved within days by a school teacher and his wife. The hidden message was terrible. It spoke of killing people because it was fun, like hunting animals. It said human beings were the most dangerous prey. It also said the killer hoped his victims would become his slaves in the afterlife. It was madness written in ink. But even more frightening was this: the code did not reveal his name. The mystery remained. By now, fear spread across Northern California. Couples were afraid to park in quiet places. Parents warned their children to stay close to home. Police searched for clues but found little. The killer seemed to know how to disappear, how to hide in plain sight, yet he was not done. On September 27, 1969, two college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, were relaxing by Lake Berryessa. The water sparkled, the day was calm. They laughed, talked, and enjoyed the beauty of nature. But peace turned into terror when a man appeared. He wore a dark hood with the same crosshair symbol drawn on it. His eyes showed through cut-out holes. He held a gun and carried a knife. He tied them up, telling them he was an escaped convict who needed money and a car. But then his story turned. Without warning, he stabbed them again and again. The scene was brutal. He left them bleeding on the ground. Brian survived. Cecilia did not. Before leaving, the killer walked to their car. On the door, he wrote his symbol and listed the dates of his past attacks, almost as if signing his work. Later that night, police received a call. A man's voice said he had committed the stabbing. He even gave directions to the scene. The call was traced to a payphone not far from the police station. But once again, he vanished. By now, the name Zodiac was everywhere. The newspapers printed his letters. People whispered his name with fear. He was no longer just a criminal. He was a phantom. He could strike anywhere at any time. The killings, the letters, the ciphers, all of it showed a man who wanted attention, a man who enjoyed control. He was not only taking lives, he was playing with the minds of millions, and no one knew who he was. It was October 11, 1969. The night was cool in San Francisco. The busy streets were filled with people going home or heading out for the weekend. A cab driver named Paul Stein was working late. He picked up a passenger in downtown San Francisco. It seemed like just another ride, but it was not. The cab stopped in the Presidio Heights neighborhood, a quiet, rich area of the city. Suddenly, the passenger pulled out a gun. One shot rang out. Paul Stein fell dead behind the wheel. The killer leaned forward, tore away part of Paul's bloody shirt, and kept it as a trophy. Then he stepped out, wiped parts of the cab, and calmly walked away. This time there were witnesses. From a nearby house, 3 teenagers saw everything through the window. They quickly called the police. Within minutes, officers rushed to the scene. The description was clear. A white man, about 30 to 40 years old, stocky build, brown hair, wearing glasses. He was last seen walking toward the park. Police even stopped a man who matched the description. But for reasons still debated, they let him go. It may have been the killer himself. The murder of Paul Stein was different from the earlier attacks. It was in the middle of the city, not in a lonely place. It was bold, risky, and showed that the Zodiac had no fear. Days later, newspapers received another letter. Inside was a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt, proving that the writer was indeed the killer. Once again, he mocked the police and the public. He bragged about how easy it was to escape. He threatened to shoot school children from a bus. He wrote about planting bombs. The city panicked. Parents feared sending their children to school. Police guarded buses. Citizens searched faces in the crowd, wondering if the man next to them was the Zodiac. Fear spread like smoke through the Bay Area. The letters kept coming. Some had new ciphers. Some had strange drawings. In one, he described how he enjoyed hunting humans. In another, he demanded people wear buttons with his symbol on them, as if he wanted to turn his evil into a brand. He fed on attention, and the newspapers gave it to him. Detectives worked night and day. They interviewed suspects, checked fingerprints, and followed every lead. But each time the trail went cold. One suspect stood out, Arthur Lee Allen, a troubled man who lived in Vallejo. He was strange, angry, and had brushes with the law. People around him whispered that he might be the Zodiac. He even told friends he liked the idea of calling himself by the name Zodiac. Police searched his home and found weapons and writings that looked suspicious, but nothing was strong enough to arrest him. He remained a suspect but never faced charges. The case grew bigger than any one police department. Officers from Vallejo, Napa, San Francisco, and even the FBI were involved. But cooperation was hard. Each department had its own files, its own clues, and sometimes they did not share. The killer used this to his advantage. He moved from one area to another, leaving chaos behind. As months turned into years, the Zodiac's letters became less frequent. But when they came, they still caused waves of fear. He bragged about killing dozens of people, though only 5 were confirmed. He claimed the police would never catch him. He signed each letter with the same chilling symbol. In homes across California, people locked their doors tighter. Young couples thought twice before parking in quiet places. Every shadow seemed dangerous. Every stranger looked suspicious. The Zodiac had done more than kill. He had stolen peace of mind, and still, he was out there. Detectives often wondered what drove him. Was he insane? Was he clever? Was he just a man who enjoyed power, using fear as his weapon? His letters showed a mix of cruelty, pride, and strange imagination. He wrote about slaves in the afterlife. He wrote about bombs and guns. He wrote like someone playing a deadly game where human lives were the pieces. In November 1969, one more letter arrived. In it, the Zodiac talked about his plans to shoot children on a school bus. He said he would pick them off one by one as they got off. This message shocked the public more than any before. Police doubled their patrols. Parents prayed for safety. But the attack never happened. Some believed he was bluffing, only trying to spread more fear. Over time, the case became a battle not just of evidence, but of nerves. The killer wanted to be seen, wanted to be heard. He thrived when his words were printed, when his symbol appeared in newspapers. The media, hungry for headlines, gave him what he wanted. It became a strange dance between the press, the police, and the faceless man who called himself Zodiac. By 1970, the Zodiac had become a legend. He was more than a criminal. He was a mystery, a ghost walking the streets of Northern California. Nobody knew when he would strike again. Nobody knew his real name. His cipher still puzzled experts. His letters mocked the law, and his shadow stretched across every quiet road, every parked car, every dark corner of the Bay Area. Families mourned. Survivors lived with scars and memories. Detectives carried the weight of failure, and the people of California lived with a question that grew larger with each passing day. Who was the Zodiac Killer? The year turned to 1970, but the shadow of the Zodiac only grew darker. His letters continued to arrive at newspapers. Each one was strange, sometimes cruel, sometimes mocking, sometimes almost playful. But always, the words carried the same threat. He could strike again, and no one could stop him. In April of that year, another long letter reached the San Francisco Chronicle. It contained a new cipher, more complicated than the last. It also included maps and symbols, as if the Zodiac wanted to play a game with the police. He marked a spot on the map near Mount Diablo with his crosshair sign. He claimed that if police cracked his puzzle, they would learn the location of a bomb he had planted. Detectives studied the letter with care. Code experts worked on the cipher, but it was not easy. Some parts seemed like real clues. Other parts seemed like tricks designed to waste time. The Zodiac liked to confuse. He liked to make himself seem smarter than everyone else. At the same time, more reports came from people who thought they had seen the Zodiac. Some said they received phone calls. Others said strangers followed them. Police tried to separate real leads from wild stories, but it was hard. Fear made people see danger everywhere. One night in March 1970, a woman named Kathleen Johns was driving with her baby near Modesto, California. A car pulled up behind her, flashing its lights. She stopped, thinking something was wrong. The driver told her that her tire was loose and offered to help. He seemed polite, almost kind. He fixed the wheel and then told her to follow him, but as she drove, the tire came off. She realized he had tricked her. He offered to drive her to a gas station. Afraid, but with no choice, she got into his car with her baby. As the miles passed, her fear grew. The man did not take her to a station. He drove back roads, slowly, speaking in a calm but chilling voice. She felt trapped. At one point, she escaped with her baby and hid in a field until a passing truck picked her up. Later, she told police that the man who took her looked like the description of the Zodiac. Weeks later, the Chronicle received another letter. In it, the Zodiac claimed he was the one who had picked up Kathleen Johns. He wrote as if proud of the terror he had caused, even though she had escaped alive. The letters kept coming, and each one added to the mystery. Sometimes they contained ciphers. Sometimes they included parts of clothing from victims, proving the writer was real. Other times they were filled with rambling ideas, as if the Zodiac wanted to show his strange mind. In June 1970, he sent another letter, this time demanding that people wear buttons with his crosshair symbol on them. He wanted to see his sign everywhere, on the clothes of ordinary citizens. He wanted to turn his private symbol of death into a public mark. Few people listened, but the demand showed how much he craved attention. By now, the Zodiac had become more than just a killer. He had become a figure of fear in American culture. His symbol was known by children and adults alike. His words were printed in newspapers across the country. Detectives in California felt the weight of the world on their shoulders. The killer seemed to enjoy not only the act of murder, but the control of fear. He did not need to kill every week. Sometimes just a letter was enough to remind everyone he was still there. But even with all his boasting, his true identity remained hidden. Police tested fingerprints. They questioned suspects. They studied handwriting. Still, every path seemed to end in nothing. One of the main suspects, Arthur Lee Allen, continued to draw attention. He owned a watch with the brand name Zodiac. He was known for strange behavior and violent moods. When asked about the killings, he often gave odd answers. But again, no proof connected him to the crimes. He remained in the circle of suspicion, but the law could not touch him. The summer of 1970 passed with more letters, more ciphers, and more threats. The Zodiac claimed he had built bombs and buried them underground. He even sent diagrams of his devices. Police searched but found nothing. Many believed he was lying, trying to stretch his legend. Others feared he really had such weapons hidden, waiting to explode. By the end of the year, people began to wonder if he had slowed down. The murders seemed to stop, but the letters did not. The words on the page were enough to keep his ghost alive. In 1971, the case grew colder. The Zodiac's letters came less often. Police departments struggled with old files, stacks of papers, and unsolved questions. Each detective carried the case like a heavy weight. Some retired, frustrated. Others stayed, hoping that one day the truth would come. Yet the Zodiac was not completely silent. In March 1971, the Los Angeles Times received a letter in which the Zodiac claimed he was responsible for a 1966 murder of a young student named Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside. She had been stabbed to death outside her college library. Police had always wondered if her case was connected. The Zodiac's letter seemed to confirm it, though doubts remained. The mystery only grew wider. Was the Zodiac killing before 1968? Was he responsible for other crimes across California? Nobody knew for sure, but he wanted credit. He wanted his shadow to stretch farther and farther. By the mid-1970s, the Zodiac had become quieter. His letters stopped coming so often. Some wondered if he had died or gone to prison for another crime, or simply lost interest. But even in silence, his name carried fear. The newspapers still wrote about him. Books were being planned. People argued about who he was and how he had escaped capture. The survivors of his attacks carried memories that never left them. Michael Mageau, who lived after being shot in 1969, remembered the flashes of gunfire. Brian Hartnell, who survived the Lake Berryessa stabbing, remembered the strange hooded figure with the symbol on his chest. They had seen the face of horror and lived to tell about it. But even they did not know who the man really was. The Zodiac had done more than take lives. He had created a puzzle with no solution, a mystery that seemed endless. Each clue led to another question. Each letter deepened the fog. And so, as the 1970s rolled on, California moved forward. But the shadow of the Zodiac never truly faded. His name was whispered in schools, in homes, in police stations. He was the killer who mocked the world and walked away into the darkness, leaving only his strange words and his cruel symbol behind. The years passed, but the Zodiac's name refused to fade. Even as the letters slowed, people still looked over their shoulders at night. Police still opened old files and searched for new ideas. Reporters still wrote stories asking the same question over and over: who was the man behind the symbol? In 1974, a new letter arrived. By then, it had been months since the last one, and some thought the Zodiac was gone. But the letter proved otherwise. It was short, angry, and strange. In it, the Zodiac complained about the movie industry. He mocked a film that was popular at the time and signed the letter with his usual crosshair mark. He added that it would be his last letter. But was it really the end? Detectives debated. Some believed the killer had grown tired. Others thought he had moved on, maybe even left California. A few feared he was still killing, only without writing letters to claim the crimes. The mystery deepened. In the late 1970s, the case grew cold. New crimes filled the headlines and new killers took the spotlight. But the Zodiac never truly disappeared. His letters, his ciphers, and his symbol kept his ghost alive. Detectives held meetings, studied files, and compared notes. They still watched suspects like Arthur Lee Allen, but nothing solid ever appeared. The 1980s arrived, and with them, new tools. Police began using computers to collect and compare information. Old evidence was reviewed. Detectives hoped that fresh eyes or new machines might solve what human effort had not. Yet the Zodiac stayed out of reach. In 1991, a television show about unsolved crimes aired an episode on the Zodiac. The case returned to the public eye. Viewers were reminded of the hooded figure at Lake Berryessa, the bloody shirt from the cab driver, the strange ciphers filled with symbols. Once again, tips poured into police departments. People claimed they knew the killer. Some named neighbors, some named relatives, some named old classmates. The phones rang, letters arrived, and detectives listened. But once again, no proof came. Then came 1992. On that year, Arthur Lee Allen died of a heart attack. Many had thought he was the best suspect. He matched the physical description. He owned weapons. He had lived near the crime scenes. He had even spoken about calling himself Zodiac. But with his death, questions became harder to answer. Police searched his belongings again, hoping to find something final, something to prove guilt or innocence. They found nothing that closed the case. Still, the Zodiac's name lived on. Writers and filmmakers grew interested. Books appeared, telling the story of the murders and the letters. Some books pointed to Allen, others offered new suspects. Some claimed the Zodiac had killed far more people than the police confirmed. Each book added more theories, more debate, and more confusion. In the early 2000s, DNA technology gave detectives new hope. Scientists could now take tiny samples and search for matches. Police examined the stamps and envelopes from the Zodiac's letters. Perhaps his saliva or skin cells were still there. They ran tests, but the results were uncertain. Some DNA was too weak. Some may not have been his at all, but from people who handled the letters later. The dream of solving the case with science was not yet real. In 2007, a major film called Zodiac was released. Directed by David Fincher, it told the story of the killings and the investigations. It showed the fear of the Bay Area, the obsession of the detectives, and the endless mystery. The movie renewed interest in the case. Young people who had never heard of the Zodiac before now knew his name. Once again, the question returned: who was he? After the film, more books and documentaries appeared. The case was discussed on television, on radio, and later on the internet. Amateur detectives formed groups, studied the ciphers, and shared theories. The Zodiac mystery had moved from police files to public minds. Thousands of people wanted to solve the puzzle. In 2020, more than 50 years after the first murders, something remarkable happened. A group of code experts, working from different countries, cracked one of the Zodiac's most famous ciphers, the 340-character code. The solution revealed chilling words. The Zodiac mocked the police again, laughed at the idea of being caught, and spoke about enjoying life as he hunted people. But once again, the code gave no name. The killer's identity was still hidden. By now, the Zodiac case had stretched across decades. Survivors had grown old. Detectives had retired. Some had died never knowing the answer. Yet the mystery remained. People on internet forums still argued. New suspects were named almost every year. Some thought the Zodiac was dead. Others believed he had lived quietly. blending into the world like any ordinary man. What made the story so powerful was not just the killings, but the way the Zodiac had played with everyone. He had killed, but he had also written. He had left clues, but also lies. He had made himself into a character, larger than life, half man, half ghost. Even in silence, his shadow lived. The police files were thick. Thousands of pages described interviews, crime scenes, letters, and reports. But among the papers, one thing was missing: proof. The case remained unsolved. Still, there was hope. With new DNA methods, with fresh eyes, perhaps one day the truth would come. But until then, the Zodiac Killer remained what he had always been: a mystery. A figure who stepped out of the dark in 1968, left blood and fear behind, and then vanished without a trace. The story of the Zodiac was no longer just about crime. It was about how fear could shape a city. It was about how one man's actions could haunt a country. It was about how some mysteries refuse to die. And so, even after 50 years, his name was still spoken. The crosshair symbol was still remembered. The victims were still mourned. And the question remained, echoing like a whisper in the night: who was the Zodiac Killer? Time kept moving, but the Zodiac case refused to rest. Decades had passed since the first murders in 1968. Yet his name still appeared in headlines and conversations. For some people, he was only a ghost story from the past. For others, he was still very real, still dangerous, and still waiting to be unmasked. Detectives in California carried the case across generations. When one retired, another took over. Files were passed down like heavy boxes filled with secrets. Inside were photos, reports, letters, and endless lists of suspects. Each detective studied them, hoping to see something that had been missed. But the answer never came. Amateur investigators also joined the search. On the internet, groups formed. They studied the ciphers, compared handwriting, and shared theories late into the night. Some thought the Zodiac was a teacher. Others believed he was a truck driver, moving from town to town. A few believed he had been in the military, skilled with weapons and codes. The theories stretched wide, but none gave the final truth. Every few years, a new suspect's name reached the news. Some seemed to match the descriptions. Some had dark pasts. But always, the proof was too thin. The Zodiac's mask stayed on. For the families of the victims, the years were heavy. Mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters grew old without answers. They carried grief that never faded. Some died before knowing who had taken their loved ones. Survivors lived with scars, not only on their bodies but also in their memories. They had looked into the face of terror and survived. But they were never free from the night when death came close. The Zodiac's story became a part of American culture. His letters were studied in schools as examples of codes. His symbol appeared in books, films, and even art. People who had never been alive during his crimes still knew his name. He was not just a killer. He had become a legend, a dark figure that history could not forget. In 2021, a group of independent investigators called the Case Breakers announced that they believed they had identified the Zodiac. They named a man who had died years earlier, claiming evidence linked him to the crimes. Their news spread quickly, but police were cautious. Officially, the case remained open. The debate continued. Was it really him? Or was it just another theory, another name in a long list of suspects? Even with modern technology, the puzzle was not solved. DNA samples were still tested. Old evidence was still studied. Each time, people hoped the case would finally close. Each time, the mystery remained. The Zodiac had managed something rare. He had outlived time. Most killers are caught or fade into history. But the Zodiac was different. His crimes were brutal, but his words were what kept him alive. The letters, the ciphers, the threats, they gave him a voice that never died. Even decades later, that voice could still be heard on the pages of newspapers, in the files of detectives, and in the whispers of people who remembered. For many, the Zodiac represented more than one man. He represented fear itself, the fear of the unknown. The fear of evil hiding in plain sight, the fear that someone could kill, write about it, laugh at it, and still walk free. That fear reached beyond California. It touched America, and even the world. At night, people sometimes imagined him, a man with glasses, heavy-set, walking calmly down a dark street, a hooded figure with a knife by the lake. a stranger stepping into a cab holding a gun. These images lived in the minds of those who knew the story. He was not just a killer in the past. He was a presence in the present, and yet for all his fame, he was still invisible. His real name, his real face, his real life, these remained hidden. He could have been anyone. A neighbor, a co-worker, a man buying groceries. Perhaps he had lived a normal life after the crimes. Perhaps he had died long ago. Nobody could be sure. The Zodiac case stands as one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. Police worked for decades. Reporters wrote countless stories. Codebreakers cracked puzzles. Filmmakers turned the story into movies. Writers filled shelves with books. And still the question was the same. Who was he? As the years rolled into the 2020s, hope remained that one day science would break the silence. Maybe DNA would give the answer. Maybe a lost letter or a forgotten clue would appear. Maybe someone would confess. But until that day, the Zodiac's mask stayed firmly in place. For now, his story ends not with an arrest, but with an emptiness, an unfinished line, a shadow that stretches across time. He killed in darkness, then wrote in daylight. He mocked the police, frightened the people, and played games with the world. He left behind victims who should never be forgotten, David and Betty Lou, Darlene, Cecilia, Paul, and others who may never even be known. Their lives were cut short, but their names remain in the story. The Zodiac wanted attention, and he got it. But what he did not get was the power to erase his victims. Their families, their friends, and the people who still tell this story make sure they are remembered. The killer remains a mystery, but the victims remain real. They were sons, daughters, friends, and neighbors. Their lives mattered more than the man who took them, and so the story of the Zodiac ends where it began, with silence and shadows. A man appeared, brought terror, and then disappeared. He left behind fear, puzzles, and a symbol that still chills the heart. But he also left behind a question that may never be answered. Who was the Zodiac Killer? That question still hangs in the air, like a whisper in the dark night of Northern California, where once, long ago, a car drove down a lonely road and two young people thought they were safe. The Zodiac came out of the dark, took lives, and then disappeared. He left behind fear, puzzles, and questions that were never answered. Decades later, his name is still known, but his face is still hidden. His story ends not with truth, but with mystery. The world still asks the same question. Who was the Zodiac Killer? Subscribe to Crime Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends.